Tick. The departure board clicks like a metronome, counting down to a moment no one foresaw. Lena. Mara's voice trembles as if the word itself could hold her daughter upright. A suitcase hits tile. A chorus of footsteps becomes a wall. Lena's fingers go slack in Mara's hand. The world folds into the soft, terrible sound of a body meeting the floor. Make space. 2 fingers on her wrist. A man's voice is calm enough to be a command and sharp enough to shame the crowd into silence. Mara hears his name before she believes his face. Adrian. She tastes the word like a coin that belonged in a pocket she closed years ago. He kneels beside them like he remembers how to make the universe right by the geometry of his hands. She's breathing. Keep talking to her. Don't stop. Please. Mara's whisper is thin enough to be swallowed by the fluorescent lights. The PA system pings like a heart monitor in the background. A tear slides from Mara's cheek and drops onto the tile as if it cannot find anything else to land on. They move into the clinic like a procession that keeps beginning over and over again until something steadies them. The curtain clangs shut and the air narrows, and the only sound is the small machine counting Lena's pulse and the softer one of Mara trying to speak without unmaking herself. The man with the tidy voice takes off his jacket and arranges it over Lena's knees like a child arranging a blanket. His hands are the same hands that once smoothed her hair, and that memory strikes Mara like cold water. Clean, sudden, impossible to ignore. How long since she ate? He asks the nurse in that clipped way that names problems instead of grieving them. Hours, Mara says, because she cannot not answer. We missed breakfast. Flight at noon. I thought she'd sleep on the plane. The nurse presses a strip of paper against her palm. Glucose is low. We'll give her juice and monitor. Adrian looks at Mara as if he is reading a script he helped write and now cannot fully comprehend. Do you have her medical card? He asks. She pats a purse that feels like a ledger of half-answers. Yes. He takes it without ceremony and without making it into an offering. He reads the name and the dates the same way he might read a line of code that once mattered less than it would now. I'll take care of intake, he says. His voice is a bridge between past cruelty and present service. They are polite to each other because the terminal has witnesses and because dignity is a language still practiced despite everything. Lena is small and raw and altogether unashamed. She murmurs "Mama" like a prayer and grips Mara's finger as if it might anchor her to the world again. Mara's ribs feel too thin to hold so much terror and gratitude at once. Will she be okay? Mara asks the question that tastes like bargaining. Yes, Adrian answers, but honest men don't get to say yes automatically. He says, she will be. And it functions like a promise or a vow or a lie she does not want to test. They are escorted out the back to a taxi because the gulf between the terminal and the motel is smaller than the space inside Mara's head. The driver asks no questions. Mara counts the breaths of her daughter like beads, and the car smells like stale coffee and the city that has decided to keep moving without consulting anyone involved. At the motel, the room is small and acoustic with fluorescent honesty. Lena curls into the blanket and sleeps like someone practicing a new life in a borrowed bed. Mara sits on the edge of the mattress and hears 100 old arguments in the hollows of the radiator. She thinks of the night she left, of the leak and the press conference, and the way the world rearranged itself around a story that made sense only if she performed villainy convincingly enough. Adrian sits in the chair by the window with his knuckles white where they grip a paper cup of coffee he keeps forgetting to drink. He does not sleep downstairs because his offer to stay would have felt like an intrusion and because both of them still have scraps of pride to guard. You didn't have to come, Mara says low, the words measured because measuring is the only way she remembers how to survive. I know. He sets the cup down as if it's a small surrender. I wanted to. She hears the old cadence in him, the way he used to answer questions about the future with the certainty of someone who had planned every step. Now his certainty is frayed around the edges like old rope. Why? She asks. He looks at the child who has dreamed up stories about trees and secret guardians and says, because I can't stand the idea of you being afraid and alone. That sounds like the sort of thing you said once, and then tomorrow you turned it into a press release, she answers, and the accusation lands beside them like an old coin. He lets the coin sit. I know I was wrong then. His voice is a small room of apologies. I know I hurt you. I know we became more of a headline than a story about two people. They sit like two people who have been reduced to the same verb, remembering. Silence becomes the language neither wants to study, but both are fluent in. Morning in the clinic is a prism of white light and good intentions. Lena eats toast with the concentration of a child deciding whether the world is safe again. The pediatrician is patient and asks questions like she's searching for the shape of weariness in the small bones. Tests are ordered, blood taken, hands held. When do you last remember her being like this? The doctor asks Mara, not as an interrogation but as a mapmaker trying to chart a path forward. Mara says, I thought it was the move. New bus. New school. I pick up shifts. The sentences are the kind that add and add until the sum looks like a life balanced on coins. Adrian listens like someone cataloging toolboxes he will someday lend but not use for himself. He does not ask questions for spectacle. He asks them because the child beside him is, in this moment, more important than his company lines, his stock tickers, the empire he runs. There is a new gravity to him, one that has light where there used to be only angles. Later, at a park with a pond that smells of duck and future summers, the doctor calls. Iron is low, she says. It's manageable. Supplements and a recheck. Mara breathes as if someone's closed a window she had been staring through for months. Adrian's face becomes a map of relief and something else, something like guilt settling into the small print. He reaches for Mara's hand without asking, and she lets him. The contact is not a concession as much as it is something she forgot she was allowed to accept. Come to the office, he says suddenly, as if conjuring the office could rewrite the past. The phrase is an old door creak that used to mean meetings with PowerPoints and coffee strong enough to dissolve conscience. Now it hangs in the air like a dare. Why? Mara asks, because why has always been the tool that pries secrets loose. There's something I want you to see, he answers. No lawyers. No cameras. Just records. Her laugh is a small, brittle thing. Records. She means the word to sting, and it does, but curiosity is a slow fire and it warms things that have been cold too long. The next day, the office is quieter than the city that always hums outside the glass. It is not the glossy, all-powerful chamber she remembers. There are plants in odd corners and a bookshelf heavy with real paper. The receptionist smiles without filing the interaction into a spreadsheet. The conference room he brings her to is modest, lit by downcast bulbs that cast honest shadows. He sets a single folder between them like a lined-up soldier. The paper inside smells faintly of ink and decisions. It's minutes, he says simply. The meeting before the launch. Mara's fingers hover like a distant lightning strike. You were present. Her voice is a question and a dare. I was, he says. I opposed it. She laughs, but it's not the laugh she remembers. And yet it happened. The board, the lawyers, the PR, memory unspools with the noise of a gavel. He nods. It was tied. We had a deadlock. The bylaws favored the status quo. The motion passed. I filed an injunction that day, but it came too late. His thumb taps the edge of a circulated memo, worn as if by worry. I didn't know you'd leak it. Her fists clench without meaning to. You think that makes a difference? She asks. You think being on record as opposing something undoes what happened to the people who got hurt or the 600 who lost paychecks? You think it mends the calloused edges you left in me? He looks at her and there is a tired pull to his jaw, the shape of someone who keeps recomposing his face to fit a new truth. I never wanted you harmed, he says, and the grade of the words makes them less defenses and more fragments of confession. She reads the minutes in a slow, surgical way. Votes. Names. A motion marked with a red pen. Her world, once a jagged collage of headlines and anger, rearranges itself into something more complicated than her certainty allowed. She finds a line that makes her stomach go cold with surprise. Establishment of Patient Safety Fund, anonymous donors. What's this? She asks, and the question is small and hot as a coal. Adrian breathes, not the neat inhale of the corporate stage but a soft human intake. I used personal funds, he says quietly. Not the company. I couldn't risk the optics. I set up a fund to pay for treatment and community clinics when the board wouldn't act. She stares at the words until they blur and the page becomes the sea she once thought she'd drown in. It is possible, she thinks, to be furious and astonished at the same time. You could have told me, she says, the grief in the sentence raw and unmannered. You could have saved me 1,000 quiet humiliations. He closes the folder and leans back in his chair like a man who is afraid of the sound his next words will make. I wanted to. I thought telling would mean I'd put you in some debt to me. You would see charity where I saw responsibility. I didn't want you to be beholden to anything I did. His hands are empty maps. Mara stands and walks to the window and presses her palm to the glass. The city stretches, anonymous and relentless. For a long time the only sound in the room is the humid whir of the building's ventilation. She turns slowly, the shape of her face carved by light and decisions. So what now? She asks, voice steady in a way that surprises her. He looks at her as if he is measuring whether the bridge will hold. Make it public, he says. Put it in the bylaws. Tie bonuses to safety outcomes. No more whispers. No more anonymous fixes. If I was wrong to keep this a secret, then let me be wrong the other way now. She laughs because sometimes laughter is the only answer left when the heart insists on a future bigger than pride. You want to change policy because I made you look like a man who needed to be better, she says. You want absolution dressed as reform. He shakes his head. I want accountability. For the patients and for us. His eyes catch hers, and for a moment the space between them fills with a fragile sort of trust. A silence settles, thick as a shawl. Outside, a delivery truck backs up twice, the beep a little piece of ordinary life that refuses to be rearranged by confessions. Mara folds herself against the table, fingers splayed on the folder like someone who has been given an instrument and must learn to play it without breaking. She thinks of Lena's small hand in hers at the airport, of the way the child had trusted easily and loudly and without the complex ledger that adults keep. She thinks of nights spent rationing apples and hope and how a secret fund could have been a different story if it had reached them sooner. Prove it, she says finally. Make it public. Not for me. Not for you. For everyone you could have helped and didn't because we all hid behind our own versions of fear. He exhales so long it sounds like someone releasing a held breath after surfacing. Done, he says, and there is something like a vow in the word. They stand then, not as enemies preparing a formal duel, but as two people who have found a small, dangerous common ground. On the street below, life continues. People carry suitcases and love and groceries and grief, all in the same rhythm. Adrian walks Mara and Lena to a small cafe for dumplings and hot chocolate because a child's appetite has a way of stitching a family back together in pieces. Lena narrates her book with dramatic accents, and everyone at the next table smiles like small weather. The folder sits between Mara and Adrian on the table like a talisman and a weapon. They do not kiss. They do not rush. They move, for now, as people learning to place one foot in front of the other without tripping over the past. Later that night, when the city goes quiet and Lena sleeps in the bed they have made into a small island of safety, Mara sits on the radiator and lets the new news settle into her bones. The fact that someone she once hated has been secretly giving to the clinics in her neighborhood makes her chest ache in ways that don't fit tidy categories. She places her palm on the watch Adrian once wore and remembers the day he gave it to her, the small domesticity of a present that cost less than the conversation it once started. The building hums. The radiator clicks as if to say the world will keep warming whether they decide to let it or not. A notification pings on her phone and she reads a headline that will later multiply across feeds. Corporate fund goes public. CEO commits to safety bylaw change. There will be shows and scoops and smug takes, she knows. There will be those who call her sellout and those who call him saint. She will feel both labels like an ill-fitting coat. For now, the only evidence that matters is the sleep evening breath of the child in their shared room and the folder on the table with its line that read like a confession. Establishment of Patient Safety Fund, Anonymous Donors. Outside, a plane cuts across the sky and the city's lights blur like hesitant stitches along the horizon. Mara closes her eyes and allows herself the smallest, most dangerous thing. The idea that sometimes the person who broke you can also become the one who helps you mend what's left. The morning after the folder goes public, the city sounds like a question mark waiting for an answer. Did you see this? Lena asks over pancakes, syrup between her fingers like glue and hope. Mara folds the paper with gentle hands that have learned to not break easily. They printed the bylaws. He kept his word. Across town, a columnist sharpens their pen and a boardroom mutters into sleeves that used to buy silence. The news spreads like a weather front. Some welcome the rain, some curse the wind. Adrian reads it on the subway, the headline a small, hard jewel. Safety Fund Public. CEO commits to reform. He closes the app, breathes, and thinks about the child asleep under sheets with moons he'd helped hang. Tick. The clock is less a metronome than a witness now. They move through the week like people learning new choreography. Lena returns to school with a booster of iron and an overabundance of jokes about being a professional napper. Mara goes back to her clinic volunteer shift and finds that repetition is a small miracle. Translating paperwork for a neighbor, she discovers speaking for someone else is a way to stitch language to dignity. Adrian makes public statements that read like apologies and policies, and he sleeps less but shows up more to kitchen counters and school plays than he ever had to balance sheets. Then the first blow comes like winter, slow and rumor-laden. A board member, old in money and older in habit, leaks an internal letter arguing that the fund will sink profitability and send competitors after their market share. Traders like wolves smell indecision and hunger for it. A quiet coup begins, papered and polite at first, then sharper, with lawyers drafted like battalions. "You should step down," his counsel says one evening in a room that smells of polished wood and tired air. "You defend the policy and you suffer the risk. The shareholders are restless." Adrian looks at the man as if he has been asked to translate a language he no longer expects to speak. "Step down because I put safety ahead of speed," he asks quietly. "I did the job I promised to do." "It's political," the lawyer answers. "The optics are messy." Adrian closes his eyes and remembers Lena's small hand in his at the airport, the way she trusted without ledger. He thinks of the children who had been helped quietly by the fund he hid like contraband. He thinks of the woman sitting on a radiator in a room smelling of lemon and old arguments, and decides he will not let corporate cowardice find a new voice in his silence. "Tell them what happens if I leave," he says instead. "Tell them who will lead this if not me." The lawyer hedges and names a few safe figures and impossible promises. Adrian stands. "Then make a choice," he says. "If my stepping down will protect them from me doing the right thing, I'll step down. But if losing me means the fund unravels, I'll stay and take whatever falls. I'm not doing this to keep my title." There is a long, wintered quiet in the room. The counsel files his notes with the slow dignity of men who practice patience like stalking. At home, Mara watches the news and sees the board's maneuvering played in tidy soundbites. Her stomach becomes a small, legal battlefield again. She wants to protect what she helped start, what helped kids like Lena. She picks up the phone and dials a number she used to watch glow in another life. "Hello." Adrian answers, immediately present like a lighthouse thrown on in fog. "They're talking about unseating you," Mara says fast. "You said you'd risk it. Do you still mean that?" "I mean it," he replies without hesitation. "But I meant it for the right reasons, not as performance. If I step down, the policy goes with me unless we weld it into the company's bones." "Then weld it," she says. "Your hands know the tools." He considers. "I could put the charter in a trust, create a public board with community seats. Tie executive compensation to safety metrics auditable by independent groups. That's the kind of language the press will like," she says. "Make it real, not theater." The pause between them is not empty. It is the space where something pragmatic is born. He works the plan like a craftsman. Meetings run long into nights. He brings in external auditors and calls in favors from a handful of allies who still remember the man before his ego learned to look like armor. Mara helps by showing up where she can. At a community hearing, she reads testimony with a voice that does not quiver. People see the unglamorous machinery of activism and begin to believe that rules can be a kind of mercy. The board pushes back harder. Anonymous op-eds question his motives. Some journalists sniff for a scandal to chew. A tranche of investors threaten to withdraw if quarterly outlooks falter. For the first time since the launch of his company, profit is not a ledger but a moral test. You're going to lose them anyway, a board member says to Adrian in a closed meeting. Either this fund costs you control or you cost it legitimacy. Adrian's answer is simply human. Then I'll take the cost. His voice is a door finally left open. I won't trade children for share price. That night, when Mara tucks Lena into bed and smooths the moon-patterned curtain, she hears a street musician 3 floors below playing an off-key lullaby. It is not perfect. It is exactly what they have now. The weeks of pressure produce their own weather, storms that move in drifts. Yet the trust they've been building keeps them from falling apart. Adrian starts attending literacy hours at the community clinic, reading to a small group so teenagers on cell phones can see a man who signs checks also holds a book and stumbles through the silly voices. He does not do it for optics. He does it because the first time a child read a sentence aloud and looked up at him like they'd noticed his real eyes, something in his chest unclenched. Mara, who once prized independence like an armor, learns how to ask for help without naming it a transaction. She accepts the occasional car ride from a driver with Robert's polite eyes. She lets herself be present at events where money exists in the background but doesn't define the conversation. She is surprised to discover that being grateful does not always cost a thing. Lena, who used to apologize in whole sentences for existing, grows louder. At a clinic event she hands out paper stars she has colored and tells children they are professional nap champions, which earns a string of giggles and a blurred picture on a phone that later becomes a small, tender viral thread praise. The world starts to make her feel less like a hazard and more like someone worth keeping. Then comes the test that will not be contained to company memos. A reporter, eager and hungry for headlines, uncovers a set of emails from long before the fund became policy. The emails include a scathing draft from a former executive suggesting that patient safety programs were PR insurance. And the quotation is cruelly ripe for the kind of clickbait that sacrifices nuance for heat. Mara watches the piece trend and feels a familiar cold, like a handsaw across the tender part of a stitch. She knows the headline will be interpreted in a way that harms the very work she has just begun to love. She thinks of Adrian walking into a meeting with bruises not visible to news cameras. She thinks of Lena, leaning against a radiator and naming colors. She calls him immediately. They'll turn the old memo into a weapon, she says, voice sharp as winter. They'll act like everything that came after was theater. He is quiet for a long time, which is the sound she used to dread. Then he says, then we show what theater looked like before we rewrote the stage. We bring the people the fund helped to speak. We let the clinics tell the story. She hears in his words the essence of the campaign they always avoided. Testimony over press releases, bodies and voices over neat subheadings. It is messy and human and exactly the kind of thing that takes time to breathe. They assemble a coalition. Parents from neighborhoods where the fund paid for iron screenings come forward. Nurses who once took anonymous calls now put their faces to the microphone. A mother from a small town signs on a statement about how treatment had saved her son. The network is not quicksilver. It is patient, made of the kind of slow credibility that outlasts a headline's heat. On a damp afternoon, Mara stands on a small stage in a community hall and reads the names of children whose treatments were paid for by the fund. Her voice wavers at first, then becomes like a steady hand. People in the room stand, one by one, and tell their stories. A video rolls with grainy footage of clinic rooms and smiling nurses. The press shows up and, for once, cannot turn the witnesses into punchlines. Adrian sits in the back, so an old cameraman cannot make him the headline. He looks small and not at all diminished. When a journalist asks him a pointed question about motives, he answers, "Do our intentions matter if children get care? I fail privately. I will be judged publicly. Let the work stand." He does not sound preachy. He sounds tired in a way that is not resignation but a new shape of resolve. The pressure on the board eases because truth contains its own gravity. Investors who are not monsters realize their brands are not worth $10 million when reputations crumble under the weight of children's health. The board that once sought to depose him waffles, diffident and suddenly aware that their equations have human residues that cannot be subtracted without loss. The morning the fund's charter becomes irrevocable, a clause embedded in corporate structure that gives the ethic a seat at the table. Mara receives a call she had not expected. "We're holding a small ceremony," Adrian says. "Would you come?" She says yes because some doors need to be opened with 2 people on either side. She brings Lena, who insists on wearing a dress with tiny stars sewn into the hem, an act of small rebellions for a child who learned to measure herself by quieter metrics. The ceremony is brief. The clause is signed amid a few cameras and a bouquet of ordinary flowers. The accountants take pictures of spreadsheets no one will fully understand. The nurses take pictures of the people who finally look them in the eye. Adrian speaks and does not perform. He reads a short statement about accountability and names the trust he has set up for community oversight. After the cameras leave, they walk to a small deli that requires no reservations. Lena orders the largest chocolate chip cookie on the menu and argues philosophically about whether cookies should count as vegetables. Mara watches Adrian eat with flour on his lip and thinks, not for the first time, that the world could be worse and that some things are reparable. Months fold into a rhythm that is not smooth but honest. The fund pays for preventive screenings in neighborhoods that were once overlooked. Clinic waiting rooms begin to look less like an emergency and more like a place where people come to keep living. Mara teaches a small class about navigating paperwork, and her voice is steady with practice and fierce with purpose. They do not fly on all nights to each other's houses. They have arguments that matter and small reconciliations that matter more. Adrian learns to come without presentations. Mara learns to accept a hand without cataloging obligations. Lena learns to laugh without apologizing. There is a daughter-shaped space at the kitchen table where the family does the small, stubborn work of being a family. One evening, nearly a year after the airport, they find themselves back in the terminal by accident. Delayed flights, a borrowed hour. The departure board announces destinations and detours and 1,000 invisible reconciliations. They sit with coffee, a fortress of paperback novels, and Lena colors in a crinkled comic book she refuses to share. Do you ever think about how small accidents become the large things? Mara asks, voice low under the flat hum of the terminal. Adrian watches a family chase a toddler and replies, all the time. I think about the moments you call mistakes and how they can map a different route. Lena looks up, solemn and 3 sizes older than her years. If I hadn't fainted, would you have told Mom about the fund? She asks bluntly. Adrian does not dodge. Maybe not. Maybe some things need a falling to be noticed. But that's not how I want us to live. Mara squeezes his hand. The grip is small and translates as a promise that is less theatrical and more practical. They are tentative in joy. They have been schooled in the danger of epic gestures and the wisdom of small ones. They have learned to measure love as a verb, not an award. The fund is not perfect. There are audits and policy meetings and skeptics who remind them that bureaucracies have teeth. But there is food in clinic kitchens now and a child who no longer apologizes for smallness. On the plane home, Mara reads a note Lena slipped into her pocket that says in a child's uneven script, "Thank you for the jacket." The words make her cry without melodrama. They are the kind of small thing that is a compass. They return to a city that is both the same and subtly altered, scarred in places but more honest in others. Adrian tends his company with a new measure of patience and a new willingness to be accountable in public and small in private. Mara opens a small weekday storytelling hour at the clinic where children come to practice reading out loud and adults learn to listen. Then, on a late shift at the clinic, a nurse appears at Mara's door. She holds a folded letter with the kind of official stationery that makes people's hearts quicken. "This arrived for you," the nurse says. "From a reporter. He wants to talk about your role in revealing the minutes." Mara takes the paper like a weight and opens it. The letter is polite and thin and asks a single question that could be gentle or could be a trap. Would she be willing to sit for an in-depth profile about how truth and scandal reshaped a company? The profile would revisit the leak, the press conference, and the moments they both thought would define them forever. She looks at Adrian waiting in the hallway, hands in his pockets, tired but present. He reads the tilt of her mouth and knows the question that lives in her chest. Do we let the old story be retold because it is the most clickable, or do we risk reopening wounds for the sake of a fuller truth? "Will you do it?" he asks softly. There is no pressure in the tone, only the small, patient question of someone who has learned to wait without giving up. Mara folds the letter into her palm and feels the creases as if they are lines of a map. She thinks of Lena's hand on tile, of the jacket across knees, of the folder between them, of the clause now embedded in bylaws. She thinks of the board in its gloved hands and the clinics with their buzzing fluorescence. "Maybe," she says at last. But only if they let the kids speak. Adrian nods like someone who has already planned to listen. Outside, a plane takes off and the sound fills the city with a promise and a threat. The future they built is not guaranteed. It will be tested by curiosity, by old grudges, and by the way people love to play stories on stages. The letter is an invitation and a door with choices on either side. Mara pins the paper to the bulletin board in her kitchen, next to Lena's star drawing and the sliver of a newspaper clipping with a headline he kept. The board looks like the architecture of people who keep things. Small, necessary, earnest. She makes coffee and sits down at the table with the letter between her hands. The sunlight through the window makes dust motes spin like tiny planets. Adrian pours 2 cups and sits across from her, his face open and ordinary and real. If we tell this story again, she says, we tell the whole thing. The minutes. The leak. The fund. The children. The mistakes. Not just the parts that make us look like saints or martyrs. He reaches across and takes her hand. Agreed, he says. We tell the truth, even if it complicates the narrative. Lena appears in the doorway with 2 mugs and a face that still believes in simple miracles. If you tell your story, she announces, I want to draw the cover. They laugh, the laugh of people who used to be reluctant and are now practiced. The camera of life pulls back a little, leaving them around a table with papers and coffee and a small child who can name colors. The curtain with moons shimmers faintly in the sunlight. The folder that taught them to be more honest sits quietly on a shelf. And yet the letter on the table is a hinge. It promises narrative and danger in equal measure. There will be reporters and rope lights and the temptation to let the old wound be a headline. There will be voices who prefer tidy villains and clean arias. There will also be the work in clinics and the homework from Lena that proves small things are durable. Mara looks at her family and then at the paper and feels the familiar, electric sting of choice. I think we should do it, she says finally. We should tell it from the rooms and the waiting lines, not the press conference. Adrian squeezes her hand. Then we start with the clinic, he says. And we let it breathe. Lena ticks her head as if she's making a plan. And ice cream after. Always ice cream after. They agree on the ice cream. They agree on the truth. The plane that left arcs now as if drawing a parenthesis across the sky. A notification pings on Mara's phone. She checks it and freezes in a way that makes the room drop a degree. The headline is small at first, but the words are precise. Anonymous donor identified as CEO. Questions resurface. The article links to a thread of comments that are hungry for drama. Mara breathes out slow and steady because inhale first, then act. She looks at Adrian and Lena and the tiny moons in the curtain and sees their lives spread like a list of things to protect and risk. She feels the old fear nod, but not to stay. It is time to decide, in public, whether the ledger of their lives will be a chain or a bridge. She folds the letter back up and tucks it into her pocket like a map. Outside, the day leans into afternoon and the world waits to see whether the story they told will stay theirs or be borrowed by someone else. Tick. The clock keeps marking time, and the house with a moon curtain holds its breath for the next line. The headline thrums in Mara's pocket like a second heartbeat she cannot ignore. Anonymous donor identified as CEO. She reads aloud and the words taste like rust. Lena chews her pencil like it's a charm and says, "That sounds dramatic." Mara folds the paper into a square and smooths it until the creases feel familiar, a small ritual to move the world into place. Outside the window the city makes its regular noise, sirens in the distance like a tempo and a bus braking like punctuation. Inside, sunlight slices the kitchen table in a blade that will not cut but clarifies. They have agreed to tell the whole thing. The journalist from the magazine will come next week. There will be cameras if they want them, or none if they don't. They will ask about the leak and the minutes and the fund and the nights Mara remembers like a bruise. They will ask about the boy in Tulsa and the woman in Oakland and the clinics with fluorescent consciences. She has told Adrian she will not be a prop, and he has told her in the same sentence that truth is not a press release and he does not want optics, he wants change. Are you nervous? Adrian asks, measuring the word like a small aircraft preparing for takeoff. A little, Mara says honestly. I'm nervous my old mistakes make good television. He nods and pours coffee, The shaker of spoon against cup a tiny metronome. We'll do it our way. Kids first, not quotes. Lena tucks her napkin into her collar and announces, "I'll draw the cover." They laugh the way people do when they choose courage over fear. On the morning the reporter is scheduled to arrive, their phones erupt with a different priority. Anonymous email chains, a leaked spreadsheet, and a new headline that wants the simpler frame: the scandal, the slight, the drama. Mara opens the spreadsheet and scrolls as if reading a map with too many labeled traps. There are line items, transfers, routing names that look like shells. There are dates that align unervingly with when the fund withdrew money for clinic bills. Her stomach tightens, a small fist of panic. "Someone's trying to frame this as laundering," she says, voice low like an alarm. Adrian reads without surprise and then with a precise kind of fury. "They're trying to make generosity look criminal." He paces like a man who knows jargon and legalese enough to be dangerous. "Call legal. Call the auditors. Call the trustees." She watches him move through crisis like a practiced swimmer. The part of her that once recoiled at his certainty now notices that the conviction has changed shape. Less armor, more care. The lawyer arrives in a suit that carries coffee scent and calm. He sets a tablet between them and clicks through a timetable of responses. "You need to freeze the transfers for now and issue statements aligning the fund with audited third-party controls." "Can we do that before the press?" Mara asks, the emergency of reputation on her tongue. "We can try," the lawyer says. "But someone already seeded the narrative. Whoever wants this to look corrupt has money and motive." Adrian's face tightens, but his voice is steady. "Then we show the receipts. We make the donors available. We name the clinics." He looks at Mara like someone offering a hand. "We do nothing to hide." They prepare material and plan interviews. Mara writes a list of names she wants to bring forward: nurses, mothers, a small-town pediatrician with a voice like a bell. She makes notes in her own handwriting so the memory of the past will not be put back into a neat, press-friendly box. The reporter arrives with an assistant who has a notebook like a talisman and polite eyes that register the human clutter of a real life. The moon curtain, the folder on a shelf, a shoe left at an angle someone will step into eventually. The camera is small, less theatrical than Mara expected. The journalist, a woman with a voice good for radio, sits on their couch and asks simple, sharp questions. After the event, in the small clustering of chairs, people come to them with thanks and with questions. A reporter pushes for a headline and a board member tries to gather a chorus of doubt, but the humans in the room speak louder. A clinic director brings a binder of receipts and hands it to Mara. "We keep records," she says. "We keep faces." They drive home in a car that smells like traffic and fidelity. Adrian speaks less. When he does, it is to plan legal moves and to calm Mara when she grows exhausted from speaking with so many people who still want answers. The injunction remains on the fund's transfers until an emergency hearing can review the documents. The auditors say the case will take weeks. That night, when Mara goes to bed, she dreams of the departure board again. She dreams of a tile floor and a child's fingers and the slow architecture of an apology. She wakes with the small exhilaration of someone who has run a dangerous river and not drowned. In the morning, a new notification blooms across her phone and Adrian's too. It is a short, stylized email from a member of the public. No return address, no signature. Someone has taken an old photograph from the airport and published it with a caption that reads, in accusing font, "Favoritism exposed. CEO's family benefits." Someone has circled a pixelated image of Lena's small face and highlighted a line item in a spreadsheet that lists one-time reimbursements that could be interpreted as preferential. Mara stares at the screen until the numbers blur. "They'll use Lena," she says without thinking, the words a reflex older than her logic. Adrian's jaw tightens. "We prepped for this," he says, but she hears the tremor. "We'll answer it head-on." They log evidence and receipts and clinical notes and try to trace every line item back to its purpose. The process is precise and humiliating in equal measure because someone is making intimacy into proof and privacy into a deficit. As evening comes, and the house grows small with the sound of a child's cartoon playing in the background, there is a knock at the door. Mara opens it to find two men in plain suits with an official badge that looks, starkly, like a tribunal. "Ms. Albright." one of them asks. His voice is formal and the kind of polite that masks procedure. She nods, and the man with the badge lifts an envelope like an offering. We're here with a subpoena for records related to the Patient Safety Fund. We need access to all documents and communications pertaining to transfers, donor lists, vendor contracts, and corporate counsel correspondence. Mara's breath catches, and for a moment the apartment smells like the airport tile again. Sterile, luminous, impossible to ignore. Lena looks up from the couch with goggle-eyed curiosity. Adrian steps forward and meets the officer's gaze. "We'll comply," he says. He is measured and calm, but Mara watches the subtle ways his shoulders slope at the edges, little seams of worry. "We want full transparency." The officers present the subpoena and a case number that will now live in court dockets and news cycles. They explain that the subpoena is part of an inquiry initiated after allegations of improper routing circulated in the press. Mara signs the acknowledgement with a hand that trembles only slightly. She thinks of the folder and the moon curtain and the small child who has taught them both how to be larger in the way they keep company. The officers leave with the kind of efficiency that turns living rooms into evidence lockers. After the door closes, the apartment feels like a small island surrounded by an ocean that reads like paperwork. Adrian paces and then comes to her side and wraps his arms around her. "We knew this would not be easy," he says, and the sentence is both vow and balm. "We told the truth," she replies. "We asked for the work to be seen." He nods. "And now it will be tested." There is a long, sudden quiet, the kind that keeps the world balanced between two breaths. Outside, a plane draws a white line across the sky that looks, briefly, like punctuation. Inside, Lena yawns and says, "Do you think they'll like the cover I draw?" Mara smiles and kisses her forehead and replies, "They'll like it because it's honest. And because it was drawn by you." The phone vibrates on the counter and both of them look at it at once. A new headline lights up the screen. "Government subpoena issued. Investigation launched." The words are simple and clean and will change the conversation around their table in a way that they cannot yet measure. The clock counts down, but it is no longer about a single moment on a tile floor. It is about days and hearings and the slow calculus of truth under pressure. Mara picks up the folder that started it all and holds it against her chest like armor that wants to be only clothing. She thinks of the jacket Adrian draped over Lena at the airport and remembers how small gestures can become the architecture of salvation. She looks at Adrian and Lena and at the moon curtain that moves a little in the night air from the window left ajar. The house breathes and waits. "We tell everything," she says finally, the decision both a spark and a plan. He meets her eyes and nods. "We tell everything." They do not know yet what the court will decide, or whether the fund will survive the scrutiny without being repurposed by politics. They do not know if the public will see nuance or hunger for a villain. But they have made a choice to stand in the open and let the evidence be examined, even if it tears and rends parts of their lives into new shapes. The door is closed for now, but the subpoena is a new kind of door that will not be opened without witnesses. Outside, the city continues its habitual noises and lights a small, indifferent vigil. Inside, Mara tucks Lena in and lingers by the bed as if memorizing breathing patterns. Adrian moves to the window and watches the horizon as if it could offer instructions. They are going to court, they are going to talk to committees, they are going to stand in front of cameras and auditors and judges and the court of public opinion. For now, they decide on one small mercy. Tomorrow, after the lawyers and the lists and the subpoenas, they will go for ice cream. Lena has already chosen the flavor in her head. The camera that watches stories like theirs lingers on the moon curtain and the folder on the shelf and the tiny flourish of a child's drawing tack to the refrigerator. The day after the subpoena will dawn like any other, and the world will hold its breath. The clock continues, and the story that began on a tile floor is now scheduled to be told under the brightest lights the city can bring. The story continues, and the weight of the subpoena lingers in the air like a storm that hasn't yet broken. The morning after the officers left their apartment, the world feels strangely ordinary. The moon curtain still sways in the breeze, Lena still eats her toast too slowly, and yet everything has changed. The fund is under investigation, and every step they take now feels like walking across thin glass. Mara ties her hair back with fingers that tremble. Adrian checks his phone like it's a barometer for bad weather. Headlines have already multiplied overnight. Anonymous donations or corporate cover-up. CEO faces questions about charity funds. Was a sick child just the beginning? Each title slices them open differently, but they don't flinch. Not anymore. Adrian breaks the silence first. The lawyers want us at the courthouse by 10. Mara nods. She hears her own voice answer, steady but tired. Then we'll go. Together. Lena looks up from her cereal, milk pooling on the spoon she hasn't lifted. Are you in trouble? Mara kneels beside her, brushing strands of hair from her forehead. We're not in trouble, sweetheart. We're just telling the truth to people who need to hear it. Even the scary people? Lena asks. Especially them, Adrian says softly. The courthouse looms like a monument to consequence. Gray stone, high steps, doors heavy with centuries of judgment. Inside, the hall echoes with heels, phones buzzing, voices sharp with urgency. Cameras flash as they pass, but Adrian shields Lena with his arm, guiding Mara through the throng. The government lawyer is stern, his questions stripped of warmth. Mr. Hayes, he begins, voice flat, records show transfers from your company's subsidiary to accounts linked with the Patient Safety Fund. Can you explain why routing occurred this way? Adrian doesn't flinch. Because we prioritized speed over optics. Families needed help immediately. Traditional approval channels would have delayed treatment. I chose to use direct accounts to keep children alive. And Ms. Albright, the lawyer turns, eyes narrowing, did you benefit personally from these transfers? The words are a blade. Mara feels every eye in the room fix on her. She forces herself not to shrink. No. I didn't benefit. My daughter's treatment came from the same emergency protocols used for dozens of families. I didn't know the money came from Adrian until months later. What I received was not favoritism. It was survival. The stenographer's keys click like hammers. Reporters scratch pens. Somewhere, a clock ticks too loud. After hours of testimony, they leave exhausted, but the weight between them feels different. He didn't falter. She didn't break. That evening, the press runs both narratives at once. One side paints Adrian as reckless, bending rules to move money in the dark. The other shows mothers clutching children, testifying that the fund was their only hope. The city doesn't know who to believe yet. Mara sits on the couch, folder open across her knees. The same folder that began everything. She runs her hand across the worn paper, each document a shard of memory. She whispers, almost to herself, they'll twist every kindness until it looks like a knife. Adrian sits beside her. Then we don't let them own the story. How? She asks. We tell them the part they don't know. He pulls out a sealed envelope from his briefcase, edges yellowed with years. Mara stares at it. What is that? The reason I started the fund, Adrian answers quietly. His voice is steady, but something flickers in his eyes. I never told anyone. Not even you. Mara leans closer, heart pounding. What's inside? Adrian hesitates, fingers on the flap. Proof. Of the betrayal I carry. Of the one life I couldn't save. The room falls silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator feels louder than their breathing. Mara realizes this envelope might contain the missing piece, the twist that could reframe everything, not just for the fund, but for them. Adrian holds it out, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Do you want to know the truth, Mara? The truth I've been running from since before we met. Mara looks from the envelope to his face, then to Lena asleep in her room, unaware of the storm outside her door. The decision waits in her hands. And just as she reaches for the envelope, there's a knock at the door. A sharp, deliberate knock that feels like fate interrupting. Mara freezes. Adrian rises slowly, the envelope still between his fingers. The knock comes again. Who waits on the other side could change everything. The envelope trembles in Adrian's hand like a small animal caught in a glass jar. This is the truth you've been carrying? Mara asks, voice so low it could be prayer or accusation. He nods. Everything I hid. A knock at the door slices the air. Adrian looks up as if the sound is a summons written in someone else's handwriting. "Don't open it," Mara says, but the word is more a plea than a command. He stands and moves toward the door with the envelope folded like a fragile confession. "We have to know who wants to speak now." The knock comes again, deliberate and unhurried. Adrian breathes, and the apartment holds its breath with him. "Please," Lena says from the sofa where she is half asleep with a comic on her lap, "be nice to the person at the door." The world narrows to hinges and a hand on the knob. Adrian opens the door, and a woman stands there in a coat too light for the weather, hair pulled back with impatience, and eyes that are both tired and exacting. She carries no camera, no badge, just a small notebook and the sort of patience that comes from long, careful waiting. "Mr. Hayes?" she asks. Her voice is a line drawn in ink. "Yes," Adrian says. "Can I help you?" She looks at Mara by the window and then at Lena on the couch and says, "My name is Elena Marquez. I used to work at St. Clement's Pediatric Ward. She pauses as if choosing which shape her words should take. "I came because there are things you need to know before you go to court." Adrian's jaw tightens. "We're cooperating with everything," he says. She lifts her chin, neither accusing nor apologetic. "And yet there are people who think you were only a benefactor after an image of a child fell into your lap. There are questions about motive and timing." She unfolds a small paper and reads, "I have testimony. I know the truth about the night that made you start checking accounts in the dark." Mara's hand closes around the envelope on the table as if the paper might buoy her. Elena steps inside without waiting for permission, like someone who knows the stakes of polite entrances. She sets the notebook on the kitchen table and looks at Adrian, not at the man in his suits but at the man whose hands have done things that keep people alive. "You didn't make this decision in a vacuum," she says. "You did it after you lost someone because the system you were part of failed them." Adrian's face changes in a way Mara hasn't seen, like an old script rearranging itself into a prayer. He reaches for the envelope with fingers that no longer tremble. "This is a letter from Claire." He opens it and extracts a photograph and a thin wristband, yellowed with time and smudged with old hospital ink. The bracelet reads, "Jonah Hayes, 11/04. Mara's breath stops on the word like a dropped stitch. Claire's handwriting shapes itself into more than memory. The letter reads like a map of regret, a night years ago when a boy named Jonah, Adrian's niece's neighbor in the building where he once lived, was brought to an understaffed clinic, a night when insurance questions and procurement meetings bled into a child's chance for treatment. The letter is quiet and furious in equal measure. It says he died waiting for a protocol to be approved, a delay that might have been prevented if a decision had been made differently. It names a meeting where a vote was split and the language they used to call delay, due diligence. It folds into the confession that Jonah's death changed something in Adrian that nothing else could reach. "I never told you," Adrian says, voice shredded by a memory he has carried in private. "I thought if I told you, you'd see me as weak. If I told you, you'd see the part of me that can make mistakes and still try to fix them by throwing money at pain." Mara holds the bracelet as if it were a compass and feels all the places she has been wrong and proud and small. "Why now?" she asks. "Why bring this out in a folder that could be used in court?" "Because someone is trying to reframe the story," Elena answers. "And because a few of us think the truth is a better defense than silence." She looks at Mara with the bluntness of a nurse who has seen fear mistaken for fact. "I came because I watched that child and I remember what delay looks like when it's human instead of corporate." Mara sits down hard and the chair offers her its small pity. Lena's brow furrows with the kind of instinct that makes children ask the hard questions without the artifice adults hide behind. "Was Jonah sick?" she asks, direct as a bell. "He had an infection," Adrian replies, the words like small stones. "He needed an and antibiotics, fast." The hospital protocols were tangled with procurement questions about equipment that might be cheaper next quarter. Someone said, "We'll approve it in the morning." He didn't get morning. The kitchen air tastes metallic and history. Mara presses the bracelet to her lips like a benediction for whatever innocence it once held. Elena pulls out a small folder of her own and lays it next to the photograph. "I kept these," she says. Notes from that night, the page the doctor tore out and signed, the call logs. I kept it because I thought someday someone would need the truth in their hands. Her voice is steady, and the papers look like weapons and talismans in equal measure. If you let me show these to your lawyers and the auditors now, it will prove intent. Not to exonerate you from everything, she looks at Adrian carefully, but to show the motive wasn't profit. It was panic and guilt and the kind of love that becomes clumsy. Adrian's mouth moves like someone leaping into a cold pool. I did everything I could after that. I started the fund in secret because the board would have used the announcement to bury it under PR. I thought anonymity would let the help move faster. He looks at Mara, eyes glassy with a confession he has told no one until now. I didn't want anyone to say it was about me. It was never about you, Mara replies, and the sentence is not absolution but understanding. She thinks of Jonah and the way grief can make a person pivot toward rescue or spectacle. You made a choice because you were afraid that your confession would be weaponized. Her voice is honest in a way that in the past would have cut. Outside, a car horn bleats like an impatient judge. Elena folds her notes with the economy of someone who has been in rooms where the truth was taxed for performance. I can testify, she says. If the subpoena wants to ask whether you routed funds using private accounts, I can explain why. I can show the notes that say the clinic needed immediacy, and who refused to greenlight the purchase at the time. We need to show context to the routing. Mara considers. Every ally is a blade with an edge, every confession is a risk. Yet the more tangled the plot, the more she believes in context over headlines. Why help? Mara asks Elena. You don't know us. Elena's face softens. I do know Jonah, she says simply. I watched him die. I could not let that become just a memory to bargain with. The words land like stones thrown into quiet water. I came because I believe in making evidence speak for the people who were never given a microphone. Mara nods slowly and opens her palm to the bracelet like an offering. The small plastic strip clicks like a small arrest of time. They call the lawyers and the auditors and schedule an emergency meeting. The legal team arrives with tablets and pens and the practiced faces of those who translate human chaos into law. Elena's documents are crisp and precise and, most importantly, human. The notes from the night Jonah died include a time-stamped call from a procurement officer and an email that said, politely, there were budgetary constraints that would push approval to the morning. The documents also include phone logs from an unnamed executive who tried to sign off and was blocked by a tie-wearing consensus. The lawyers murmur. This changes the narrative, one says, the kind of voice that knows how to rearrange a story into evidence. If we can show that delay and the board's inertia had a causal line to a child's death, we can argue the fund was a remedy born of conscience, not spectacle. Adrian's face is lit by the tablet screen and the glow shows lines he has tried to erase. He folds and unfolds his hands like someone with new obligations. Mara watches him and thinks of all the ways power makes people both dangerous and redeemable. If we do this, she says, we can't let it be about your heroics. We tell Jonah's story because he matters, not because we want to be absolved. Adrian closes his eyes briefly and when he opens them they are steady. We tell it honest, he says. We tell the truth and we accept what comes. The decision feels like a pact. They draft a timeline. Elena will testify to the procurement delays and the circumstances of Jonah's case. Auditors will present routing and intent, and the trust's trustees will be asked to speak to why anonymity was chosen and how it operated. They will invite public scrutiny and hope the light cleans the narrative instead of burning it. As they prepare, Mara thinks of the court and the reporters and the viewers who love a tidy villain. She thinks of Jonah and of the possibility that telling the whole truth might hurt and heal in equal measure. She wonders whether repentance can be policy and whether policy can be a form of apology. That night, after the lawyers leave with promises and subpoenas and the taste of litigation in their mouths, Mara tucks Lena into bed and lingers in the doorway. She remembers standing by a hospital bed once in a different life and the helplessness that teaches you how to measure courage. Adrian sits on the radiator and takes the bracelet from his pocket, smoothing the plastic like a rosary for a life he almost lost and could not save. Did Jonah have a favorite color? Lena asks from under the covers in a voice that means the world is someone else's story until you make it part of your own. He liked blue, Adrian says, the single syllable a small light. Blue like the ocean he never saw properly. Lena giggles and falls asleep, small and fierce, convinced that colors have secrets adults forget. They sleep in fits and starts. The next morning media vans gather like weather for a storm outside the courthouse. The subpoena hearings will be public, they will be live-streamed, they will be parsed into 1,000 opinions. Mara feels the press fold into her life like a paper bird that's difficult to ignore. At the courthouse, Elena's testimony is stark and sober, and it cracks open something in the proceedings that previously had only been speculation. She reads from her notes and the room listens, the air thick with the weight of a life described in timestamps and clinical language. She does not perform. She names the delay and the moment procurement said morning, and then the child who did not get morning. The judge listens and asks careful questions about causality and chain of command. The defense asks whether this is sufficient to prove criminal wrongdoing. The crowd leans forward because the story they want is now complicated in the most real way. A man who hid his generosity now has an old pain that explains why he could not stand idle. After Elena speaks, the room hums with a new register of outrage and compassion. Adrian testifies next and does so with the kind of nakedness that becomes dangerous when it is honest. He tells the judge he started the fund because the image of Jonah's wristband haunted him. He tells the room that secrecy was an ugly attempt at speed. Mara watches him speak and notices how the way he names guilt is not the same as the way politicians script contrition. His voice cracks at Jonah's name, and people who came for spectacle find themselves with a different commodity, real sorrow. When all is said and done, the judge does not make a verdict in a day. The law moves with the rough patience of a glacier. But the public conversation shifts. The headline still wants to render a verdict, yet the stories now contain a photograph of a child's bracelet and a nurse who remembers faces instead of memos. They leave the courthouse not exonerated and not condemned but more visible than before. They have chosen transparency as a test and found the test brutal and human. On the steps, a woman in the crowd holds up a sign that reads, "For Jonah." Mara sees it and feels the ache of the name like a hand on her shoulder. Elena slips her notebook back into her coat and turns to go. "I came because I could not watch that child be forgotten," she says to Mara quietly. "Keep his name alive. That's how we make reform that is honest." Mara nods and takes Elena's hand a little longer than a handshake. "Thank you," she whispers. Elena shakes her head slightly as if to dismiss gratitude and replies, "Just keep the clinics running. That's all that matters now." Then she walks away into the crowd like someone who has given what she could. Back at the apartment, the moon curtain flutters and the folder sits like a quiet witness. Adrian places Jonah's bracelet on the shelf beside the folder and closes his hand around the empty space it leaves. Mara stands by the window and thinks about how rescue often arrives messy, contingent, and painfully human. The next morning a new notification pings and the headline reads less hungry than before. CEO's secret fund exposed, why it might save lives, even if it breaks the rules. The tone is not sanctifying, but it opens a long debate. Mara looks at Adrian and says, "We trod in the open now. That was the bargain." He nods, the movement small and solemn. "We do the hard work in daylight." They hold hands like two people with matching scars. The story will continue into hearings and boardrooms and policy meetings and long, tedious hearings. There will be victories and losses, and the children will keep being children, and clinics will keep needing money. They have learned to be patient for results and impatient for justice. Outside, a plane draws a white line across the sky, and the city inhales and exhales like someone who has been given a complicated gift. The envelope with Claire's letter is folded now and placed in a new folder labeled with Jonah's name. The world will remind them that justice is not a single event but a long, insistently repeated thing. The clock keeps its rhythm and the story keeps unfolding. For now, they step forward with the truth exposed and the knowledge that the cost of telling it will be weighed in public and private. The next day, the subpoenas continue, the hearings resume, and the press prepares for another round. The final image is simple. Jonah's plastic bracelet laying on the shelf, sun catching the tiny scuffs, a child's name etched in faded ink that will not be allowed to be forgotten. The days after the hearing move like water, slow in the waiting, fast in the moments that cut. Adrian wakes each morning before dawn, reading drafts of legal statements with eyes rimmed in fatigue. Mara makes breakfast for Lena, trying to keep the rituals of ordinary life intact even while reporters cluster outside the building like crows. The moon curtain flutters in the kitchen window as if reminding them that night still falls and morning still rises, no matter what happens in between. But the world beyond their apartment is less forgiving. The second wave of media storms louder than the first. Headlines sharpen their edges. Secret motives. Is the fund just guilt money? Billionaire CEO blurs line between charity and scandal. From airport rescue to courtroom drama, what is the truth? Mara sees her own face on a tabloid cover, caught mid-blink leaving the courthouse, and it feels like theft. She tucks the magazine behind cereal boxes at the corner store and reminds herself that this is not her whole life, it is just the loudest part. Adrian notices her silence and asks softly one night, "Do you regret stepping into this with me?" Mara studies his face, worn but steady, and shakes her head. "I regret the noise. But not the fight." The fight grows sharper when the board of Hayes Industries calls an emergency session. Adrian is summoned to the skyscraper that bears his family's name, a tower of glass that now feels less like legacy and more like a cage. Inside the boardroom, 12 men and women in tailored suits sit around a polished table that reflects their impatience. At the head, Chairman Vaughn, a man with a smile polished by decades of politics, clears his throat. "Mr. Hayes," he begins, "your actions have placed the company under scrutiny. Clients are asking questions. Shareholders are nervous. The fund has become a liability." Adrian doesn't sit. He plants his hands on the table, voice steady. "The fund has saved lives. That is its only liability, to people who profit from delay." A woman in pearls leans forward. "Intentions don't erase procedure. Routing money through private accounts exposes us to regulatory risk. If prosecutors pursue charges, this board must distance itself." "You mean distance yourselves from me," Adrian replies. Silence thickens. Chairman Vaughn taps his pen, then delivers the blade. "The board is considering a vote of no confidence. Unless you resign voluntarily." The words land like iron. Adrian inhales once, measured, then says, "If you vote me out, you'll confirm what the critics already believe, that this company values profit over people. If that's the legacy you want, vote now." He leaves the room before they can answer. The glass doors close with a sound like judgment withheld. That night, Mara finds him standing by the window, tie loosened, the city spread beneath him like an accusation. "They want me gone," he admits. "Will they succeed?" she asks. "Maybe. Probably. But I won't resign. Not when truth is still unraveling." Mara touches his sleeve, grounding him. "They'll paint you as a man who lost everything. But maybe that's not the worst ending." He looks at her, weary but fierce. "Would you still be here if it happens?" "Yes," she answers without hesitation. "Because I didn't choose you for your title." Her words are a rope he clings to in the dark. 2 days later, the investigation deepens. Prosecutors request full disclosure of donor identities. 4 years, anonymity protected both the wealthy and the fragile, the parents who didn't want pity, the nurses who feared retaliation. Now that wall is crumbling. Adrian paces the apartment, phone buzzing with lawyers and trustees. "If we hand over every name, we betray people who trusted us. But if we don't, they'll claim concealment." Mara whispers, "Either choice costs us." And then the cost comes knocking. Literally. It is late evening, the city outside washed in rain, when a man appears at their door. He is tall, sharp-featured, his suit immaculate. He introduces himself as Richard Keene, an attorney representing one of the fund's anonymous donors. His smile is polite, but his eyes are cold. "You need to understand," he says, stepping inside with unearned familiarity. "Some of our clients gave under the condition of absolute secrecy. If their names are exposed, careers end. Reputations collapse. One of them is prepared to sue if confidentiality is breached." Adrian stiffens. Then they misunderstand the stakes. This isn't about comfort. It's about survival. Keene's gaze flicks to Mara, then back. "Be careful, Mr. Hayes. The line between savior and liability is thinner than you think. If this fund drags powerful names into the light, they'll drag you down first. He leaves a business card on the table like a warning shot and walks out, shoes clicking on the wet hallway tile. Mara stares at the card long after the door closes. Who are they protecting? She asks. Adrian doesn't answer. His silence says enough. Later that night, after Lena is asleep, Mara turns to him in the dark. Adrian, tell me the truth. Is there someone on that donor list who could destroy everything? He exhales, long and slow. Yes. Someone whose exposure could break more than this company. Then what do we do? She whispers. His answer is almost a vow. We tell the truth anyway, even if it burns us. But in the silence that follows, Mara wonders, what truth is he still not telling her? The clock counts the seconds until the next revelation, and she feels the storm building. Outside, rain slaps against the windows. Inside, the envelope with Jonah's bracelet sits beside Richard Keene's card, two relics of different battles, waiting to decide which story will prevail. And in the distance, the board of Hayes Industries prepares its vote. The boardroom's clock marks intervals like a judge nudging a verdict forward. The vote readout is projected on the wall in cold letters. Directors shift in their chairs like pieces on a chessboard. Mara and Adrian stand on opposite ends of an argument that started in a hospital corridor and now wants to be a headline. Chairman Vaughn calls the motion, the secretary intones. All those in favor of a vote of no confidence, raise your hand. Hands go up, then down, then tremble again. The air has the taste of metal and old money. Adrian's jaw is a plane of focus. Mara watches him, the faint scar behind her eyes from years of choosing herself over what seemed safe. When the count finishes, the result is narrower than anyone expected and worse than Adrian hoped. The motion does not pass, yet, but the board authorizes an independent review and insists on an interim committee to oversee the fund. The message is precise, leadership preferred, but only if it wears a leash. Outside, reporters smell momentum and circle like weather. Inside, Mara feels the win as a small and fragile thing. Adrian steps aside to speak with a trustee, and Mara catches the half-smile of a man whose patience was purchased at a new price. The day's momentum slides into evening, and they return to the apartment like a pair of weathered travelers. The moon curtain flutters, a small flag of home. Lena draws stars on the fridge, and the mundane brilliance of crayons becomes a balm against the subtle war playing out above their heads. Adrian pours wine and tries to make the room ordinary. They'll try again, he says. This is not over. Mara pours ice into a glass and watches the cubes collide with bright, private clinks. They always try again, she replies. But we put the charter into the bylaws. That buys time. He nods, the kind of nod that is more a plan than an answer. They eat quietly as if language were something to ration. A new knock on the door changes the cadence of the evening. Mara opens it to find Richard Keene standing with a man she doesn't know. Lean, accurate, a donor's lawyer by his posture. The envelope in his hand is heavy with implication. Ms. Albright, Keene says, smile flat, we represent a group of donors who gave under conditions of anonymity. They are prepared to file suit if identities are disclosed without consent. He places the envelope on the table like a landmine. This is a petition. You should be aware. Adrian's hand tightens on his glass, but he doesn't show alarm. We aren't seeking to expose donors, he says. We want to protect their wishes and combine that with the need for transparency. That's the point. Keene's eyes are cold. Some donors gave because they feared retribution. Others gave to friends. None want headlines. He pauses, then leans forward slightly. And one of our clients has leverage that could cost you everything. Mara feels the room tilt for reasons that are not only corporate. Who? She asks. The question is small and hard. Keene does not answer directly. We will move legally if you don't honor confidentiality, he says. He stands. Good evening. Then he is gone, leaving the envelope and the scent of threatened consequence. Mara drops the petition into the folder with Jonah's bracelet as if paper might be shield enough. The apartment feels suddenly like an evidence locker. The walls lean in. She thinks of the anonymous families who trusted the fund and of the one donor who can destroy the scaffolding they have built. She thinks of the chair at the board and the men and women who count reputations like coins. Adrian closes his eyes and the lines in his face deepen. He moves toward the window and stares at the city as if waiting for it to decide which side it will favor. "There are names," he says softly. "Names I can't reveal without risking more than this company." "How many?" Mara asks. The voice that slices is steadier than she expects. "Some large donors. Institutional donors. People who could cause a cascade." He pauses. "And one name in particular." Her mouth goes dry. "Who?" she demands, more raw than she intended. He looks at her as if measuring the weight of every possible consequence. "My father," he says finally. The syllable hits like a stone thrown into still water. Mara's heart runs a small sprint and stumbles. Her first sense is of history, of families built on ledgers and silences. "Your father," she repeats, not sure if she has heard the sentence right. "But she stops, because titles scent the air like danger. He fears exposure," Adrian continues. "He's a major donor to the fund because he has regrets of his own. He will not have his name printed if it can be avoided. If it's drawn into this, he will call every favor and every contact and he will fight." His voice drops to a private register. "He could trigger a backlash that will topple more than me." Mara leans back as if someone had pressed her under water and let go. For a long beat the world is only the breath in her lungs. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asks finally, and the sentence is both wounded and legal. He closes his eyes. "Because I thought I could contain it. Because I wanted the fund to be pure and not entangled with my family's." He stops, unable to finish the word that would have real edges. "I wanted to keep other people's pain from being political." "And now," she says, voice small but sharp, "now it's political." The week fractures into many small, surgical decisions. Lawyers propose protective trusts that shield donor names while providing auditors access. Board members threaten suits. Keene makes calls that cascade into midnight emails. The city seems to hum with the static of consequence. Adrian's father's name hangs like an unspoken ledger between them. Mara wonders whether a man can be both a redeemer and a perpetrator simply by being born into the wrong family. Then, in the middle of that legal fog, Mara discovers something she does not expect to find in the afternoon mail. A copy of a scanned meeting ledger from years ago, stamped with a date and bearing Adrian's handwriting in a shorthand she knows because she once read his notes like small prayers. The ledger shows a vote, an approval that should have been a refusal, and a small annotation beside Adrian's name, "Approved pending budget check." The letter is brittle with memory. Her hands go cold. She calls him immediately. "Was this you?" she asks into the phone, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. There is a pause that stretches like old glass. "Yes," he says at last. He stops as if the word he needs is heavier than ordinary vocabulary. "I signed it. I didn't push hard enough." Mara's fingers press the paper until it blanches. The vote in the ledger corresponds to the procurement that delayed Jonah's treatment in Elena's notes. The causal line she had hoped was diffuse and corporate is now a personal arrow aimed at Adrian's chest. He had not only been part of the culture that failed Jonah, he had personally signed a procedural go-ahead that hamstrung an emergency purchase. "You knew?" she asks, and the single syllable contains storms. "I knew the procurement process," he says, voice breaking on the facts. "I knew the red tape. I thought the vendor approval could wait for checks. I thought the approvals would move in hours, not days. I believed the system would bend, and it didn't. Jonah died." His confession spills like a loose dam. "I used my authority later to start the fund because I couldn't bear that I had played any part in that night." Mara sits down hard, the kitchen chair a small island for a woman whose moral compass has been rewritten twice in months. The ledger sits heavy in her hands like a verdict. "You didn't tell me that you were the one who signed the memo," she says. "You let me take on the story of the leak and the guilt when you were carrying this." Adrian's face goes raw. "I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. Because I thought if you knew how tangled I was, you would leave." I was protecting you from my own guilt and my father's networks. I thought I could make amends quietly. You made yourself the center of your own goodwill, she answers. The sentence is a strike that leaves both of them bleeding. You used secrecy as armor and then cried that it felt like loneliness. The apartment gets very quiet in the kind of way that houses do when they are about to witness a collapse. Lena appears at the door, hair a halo of bedtime tangles, eyes blinking up at them like small stars asking permission. Are you okay? She asks, voice threading a different logic through the air. Mara looks at her and then at Adrian and the ledger and feels the world narrow into the shape of two choices: the woman who forgives or the woman who refuses. We're dealing with grown-up things, she says, and the truth is both protective and evasive. Lena nods solemnly and toddles away, the natural trust of a child making both adults feel more exposed. Adrian reaches for her hand, a gesture that used to be a bridge and now feels like a rope swung across a chasm. I thought I was doing right by keeping some things private, he says. I thought I could atone. I didn't know how to ask you to stay with someone like that. Mara's fingers retreat as if burned. You think hiding the ledger frees you from being responsible? She asks. You think secrecy equals penance? Her voice is not venomous. It is exhausted and precise. You didn't just hide. You signed the thing that started the delay. I can't pretend that's a small error. He swallows the words he needs and instead says, tell me how to fix this. The plea is raw and foolish and honest. She laughs once, a small, brittle sound. You want instructions on moral repair? She asks. We don't run on roadmaps. She presses the ledger to her chest like a talisman and then slides it back to the table. You start by not hiding anything. You start by telling the truth in full, even if it burns your father's name into the paper. You start by accepting consequences without bargaining for them. Adrian's face crumples as if someone he loves has spoken a sentence that is both an execution and a reprieve. He nods once. I will tell everything, he says, even if it costs me my company. She looks at him, that impossible, human mirror where love and disappointment live together. You will tell everything, she repeats. But understand how deep this cuts. He understands. He already does. They both do. The ledger is no longer a mere document. It is a hinge that will open into courtrooms, articles, and the private arithmetic of love. The donor threat still hangs there like a guillotine with an unknown name attached. The board vote hangs like weather. The subpoenas hang like winter. They sleep poorly that night. Mara wakes to a text. The board has filed to convene a special meeting to remove Adrian if he reveals his father's name. The company politics accelerate into a new gear. Loyalty versus transparency. The donor will sue if their anonymity is breached. The board will act if scandal deepens. Adrian must choose which to protect, his father, the company, or the truth. At dawn, Mara walks to the window and watches a plane cut across the sky like a razor. The ledger sits on the counter like a sleeping thing. She thinks of Jonah's bracelet on the shelf and the way some small objects can demand a reckoning. Adrian stands beside her, hands in his pockets like someone learning to be small. He looks at the ledger and then at her and says, I will go to the board. I will tell them tonight. I will tell them in full. She breathes out like someone breaking a held breath. Then don't ask me to be anything but a witness, she says. If you tell the truth, I will stand with it. Not to vindicate you, but because the truth needs a witness. He nods, the kind of nod that is both promise and plea. I will tell the truth, he repeats, more to himself than to her. Even if it burns all the bridges. The clock demands a decision, and they both know the world will not pause for nuance. They do what people do when consequences gather like weather. They step toward the place where the next fight will be fought. Mara leaves the ledger on the table and walks to the bedroom to wake Lena. She reaches for the small hand that has once fallen limp on tile and now should be expected to be strong. She plants a kiss on the child's forehead like a benediction, and in that small, fierce gesture the world narrows to a single unarguable imperative: protect the child. When she returns to the kitchen, Adrian is gone. The front door stands open. On the table, The ledger lies where she left it, and beside it the petition from the donors is folded open like a challenge. The apartment is quiet enough to hear the clock tick. Mara picks up the ledger, and in it, in ink she knows well, is a signature she once loved and now must decide whether to trust. She knows he has gone to the board to tell everything. She knows too that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. She steps to the window and watches the city wake with a slow, indifferent grace. The next move is his, and the next reply will be a public one. Her phone buzzes with a single new headline forming in the distance. CEO admits 2 earlier procurement approval. Family ties 2 donors exposed. She breathes once. Then she breathes again. Then she walks to the shelf and lifts Jonah's bracelet. Small, faded, impossible to deny, and slips it into her pocket like a compass. Outside, the city waits. Inside, a clock clicks and a story waits to find its shape. The boardroom will make a decision tonight. The donors will decide whether to sue. The court will digest more paper. And between those institutional motions, 2 people will have to reconstruct whether trust is reparable after the ledger becomes public. Mara leaves the apartment without a word. She does not take Lena. She does not slam the door. She simply closes it with a small, practiced firmness and walks into a city that will demand an answer. The clock continues its drum, and the ledger's ink still glows on the table like the map of a future no one has fully wanted. The boardroom clock counts the hours like a metronome that has learned to hold breath. They call the special meeting at dusk so the city outside the glass can go on pretending the night is ordinary. Directors arrive with guarded faces and spare civility. Cameras are kept at bay, but the air tastes like consequence. Adrian enters without a tailored armor. He wears the same tired jacket he has worn to hearings, and his tie hangs looser than it used to, as if he's already let go of some small part of himself. He takes the chair at the head of the table and opens the ledger like someone unrolling a map he no longer wants to misread. "Before we begin," he says, voice steady and raw, "I will speak in full." Murmurs scrape the room like wind. He folds his hands and continues. "I signed the procurement approval that delayed a life. Jonah Hayes died because process became a priority over people. I carried that. I hid the fund because I thought secrecy would spare families more bureaucracy. I was wrong to hide it and wrong to assume my secrecy was a virtue." He looks up and meets each face as if searching for someone to forgive him. "I also must say that this fund was funded in part by family resources that touch this company's broader orbit. My father is a donor. He is not the only donor. I cannot, in good conscience, demand your loyalty by asking to protect names that belong to people who entrusted us. I will accept whatever consequence follows my disclosure." The room stills until someone clears their throat like a small storm. Chairman Vaughn's face is a geography of control. "Mr. Hayes, are you tendering your resignation?" Adrian nods once. "I will step down as CEO if that is what this board determines necessary to protect the fund and the company's integrity. But I will not let the fund be dismantled. I will place the fund into an independent trust, with community trustees, audited public reporting, and a clause that insulates its mission from quarterly pressure." Silence is a room they all have to walk through. A director leans forward. "You ask us to accept your resignation but to preserve your legacy." "I ask you to preserve the lives we help over the comfort of our balance sheets," Adrian answers. "If that means I am not the steward of that effort, so be it. But wrecking the fund to save an image is not an option I will sign." A vote is called. Fingers twitch. Paper rustles. Phones in pockets vibrate with half-formed headlines. The tally returns with a fragile compromise. Adrian will resign as CEO within the week, subject to an orderly transition. The board will approve the independent trust charter today and appoint 2 community trustees recommended by Mara and Elena. The fund will be audited quarterly and will publish full reports. The donor anonymity clause will be modified to allow legal auditors to view names under court order, but public disclosure will be avoided unless the donor has committed wrongdoing. The resolution is imperfect and human. It reads like policy and also like an apology that had been translated into corporate grammar. Adrian exhales a long breath that sounds like surrender and relief braided together. Mara watches him, the ledger beside her like a witness to a transformation. She thinks of Jonah and how one small life can force a boardroom to remember what money is supposed to do. Outside the skyscraper, the evening news tries to put the new decree into neat boxes. Some commentators praise the reforms. Others gnash teeth at the notion that a corporation had been a lifeline to families in crisis. The conversation will not end. It will ripple and complicate in 1,000 comment sections. But the clause that anchors the fund becomes law inside the company, and that small legal scaffolding shifts lives in ways the headlines will not fully see. That night, in a quieter part of the city, Adrian calls his father. The man answers with a long, measured voice. "I heard," he says. "You did what you thought you had to do." Adrian's throat tightens. "I will tell the public the truth about Jonah and my role." There is a long pause that feels like the turning of an old key. Then his father replies, "I am tired of my name shaping other people's endings. If telling the truth risks my reputation, then let it risk me. I will step forward and back the reforms publicly and provide funding for the trust's endowment in a way that is fully audited and transparent." Adrian presses his palm to the phone as if the human sound on the other end needs more contact. "Are you sure?" he asks. "I am sure," his father says. "I cannot change the past, but I don't want to be the man who hides it. If exposing my name protects the fund and the children it serves, then I choose the exposure." The confession is a small earthquake. It will not repair everything, but it cracks open a space for accountability and for a father to stop being the shadow in his son's choices. It changes the calculus in the boardroom, and it changes the headlines in ways no PR memo could. Mara hears the news and does not rush to joy. She feels wary, relieved, and exhausted in a single breath. She knows a public admission will be messy and painful. She also knows that sometimes sacrifice is the only way to anchor a promise. She texts Elena and introduces her into the loop, giving the nurse and the whistleblower a place at the table that is not tokenistic but central. As the trust is formed, its charter bears Jonah's name. They call it the Jonah Initiative, an independent foundation with representatives from community clinics, parents, pediatricians, and 2 board seats reserved for those who have been directly served by the fund. The organization's first mission is straightforward: expand iron screenings, subsidize pediatric transport, and fund emergency 4 access in clinics that cannot afford rapid procurement. The work is practical and immediate. The donors who feared exposure are placated by the new structure. Their legal counsel negotiates protections. Anonymous gifts become pooled endowments with public accounting that shows how cash was used without revealing names. One donor, the same man Keene represented, signs an agreement to let a portion of his pledge be used tax-free for clinics, with oversight by the trust. He does not appear in interviews. He does not demand credit. He is content to be an unnamed hand. Outside of legal arrangements, the human work continues. Mara returns to the community clinic not as a witness but as a partner. She builds a small literacy hour where children come to read and practice voices and parents come to learn paperwork. Elena works as a coordinator for the Jonah Initiative and gains a platform that turns her hospital night notes into policy leverage. Nurses who once whispered about shortages now have funding for emergency supplies and a direct line to procurement that bypasses bureaucratic waits. Adrian steps down from his CEO role in a formal press conference that is more humble than the public expects. He does not deliver a flourish. He delivers a short speech that names Jonah and confesses his errors. He announces the trust and the endowment and asks to be judged by the work that follows. He does not ask for forgiveness. He asks the public to watch the results, not the rhetoric. Mara watches him on TV and thinks of a ledger and a bracelet and a small hand on cool tile. She thinks of the way truth can be both knife and salve. She calls him when the cameras stop and the city exhales. "Are you okay?" she asks. "I am," he says, and the single word is honest in a way his earlier perfection never was. "I am afraid, and I'm tired, but I feel unburdened." "Good," she replies. "Because now we have to be very boring about helping people. Help people boringly and they'll stay helped." He laughs, and it is small and part of healing. Months pass with a steady, unglamorous rhythm. The Jonah Initiative sends vans to neighborhoods, funds mobile clinics, and publishes quarterly reports with numbers that mean more than press cycles. The board of Hayes Industries restructures. Some members leave, others retire. The company's public image recalibrates slowly as the public watches how policy becomes practice. Prosecutors review the case and ultimately decide not to bring criminal charges against Adrian because intent to harm cannot be proven and because the transparency, testimony, and reparation he offered changed the context of the earlier actions. The legal system does not exonerate him morally. He has already done that work in public. Adrian becomes a different kind of leader. Quieter, more present, less interested in trophies and more engaged with the rooms where people are kept from falling through cracks. He takes a role in the Trust's advisory council and spends afternoons at clinics where he learns to read aloud in a voice that used to only command quarterly earnings calls. He is clumsy at first and then not. He learns to untie his tie and let a child get flour on his sleeve. Mara opens a small community bookstore with a reading corner for kids. It is modest, with sun that finds the best chairs and a shelf of worn books traded in for coins. She runs storytelling hours and brings in Elena and other volunteers. The shop becomes a constellation for the neighborhood, a place where people come for paperbacks and leave with the conviction that words can be medicine. Lena grows into a child who loves facts and daisies and the way people smell of soup. She draws covers in a line of notebooks that hang in the bookstore's window. She is at once irreverent and fiercely moral in the way children are, clear-eyed about what matters and impatient with pretense. One clear evening, they stand together at a small ceremony where the Jonah Initiative dedicates a room in a clinic with Jonah's name. The plaque is simple. In memory of Jonah Hayes, may every small child find an urgent hand. Elena speaks and her voice does not shake. She does not perform. She explains how procurement changes were enacted and how emergency authorizations will now exist in law for public clinics. The room is full of people who once had to choose between medicine and rent. After the speeches, Adrian and Mara step outside into the cool air. The city lights are like an audience that has learned to applaud quietly. They walk hand in hand without a plan for heroism or headlines. They have learned to let acts be their story rather than letting stories pretend to be acts. Do you ever think about how small accidents become large things? Mara asks, echoing a question she once asked under a departure board. All the time, Adrian says. I think about what we do with the accident. We can make it a spectacle, or we can make it a policy. Mara squeezes his hand. We chose policy. He looks at her and the moon curtain in the clinic's window catches their reflection like a secret. And you chose me, he says. Even when you had reasons to walk. She answers without drama, because she has learned to value small certainties. I chose to stand where truth was being told. That was never just you. He smiles, and it is the kind of small private thing that will not appear on the evening news. They marry in a quiet ceremony on a sunlit weekday in the park where Lena used to swing and Lucas. No, Lucas is from a different story. This is Mara's new family, stitched together carefully. Friends from the clinic and neighbors from the bookstore attend. Adrian's father is there, older and less imposing, and he stands in the back with a folded program and the visible relief of a man who has spoken a truth that cost him, and who is working to repair damages with his time and money. The day is simple. Mara and Adrian exchange promises that are not framed as rescue but as work and choice. They speak vows that name the past and accept imperfection. Lena decorates a napkin with stars and insists on serving cookies. Elena gives a small speech about courage without spectacle. Jonah's bracelet is placed in a small shadow box and included in the ceremony like a quiet benediction. The Jonah Initiative grows steadily and boringly important. Clinics report fewer procurement delays, emergency 4 kits are stocked, children's anemia rates drop in the neighborhoods the trust serves. The media's appetite for scandal cools because the public sees that policy can be a better end than fury. Some critics remain loud. Some people never forgive. But more families get to keep their children home at night. Years later, Mara stands in the doorway of the bookstore and watches Lena hand a wrapped book to a small child. Her heart feels full in a way that is not boastful, just true. Adrian is at the clinic, reading to a small group of kids about brave animals and sad trees. He is better at silly voices now. He leaves the CEO title behind like clothing that no longer fit. One afternoon, she opens a drawer and finds the old ledger with Jonah's bracelet tucked gently inside a letter from Elena. She smiles, not because the ledger is gone or because the sin has been erased, but because a small plastic band once used to mark a death now marks the beginning of consistent care. The clock on the bookstore wall ticks on. The sound is no longer a metronome of fear. It is a companion at the edges of ordinary life. Mara thinks about how people who broke each other learned to build instead. She thinks about how the fun became law, and how law sometimes needs to be coaxed into doing the humane thing. At night, when Lena sleeps with her comic folded open and the moon curtain flutters, Adrian and Mara sit with hands linked and talk in sentences that have no witnesses and no cameras. They plan quiet things. Which clinic needs a new refrigerator, whether the bookstore should host an after-school workshop, how to teach children about ethics in a way that is not moralizing. Do you ever wonder if fate chose the airport? Adrian asks once as they watch a plane cross the dark like a slow comet. Mara leans into him. I don't believe in fate, she says. I believe in the small decisions that make us who we are. He kisses her temple. Then keep choosing, he murmurs. Choose us. She laughs softly. I already did. They do not change the world in a single sweep. They change it in files and meetings and groceries bought for clinic volunteers and children's books bought with donated funds. The Jonah Initiative is not a miracle. It is the patience of policy and the stubbornness of everyday people who decide to help. The final image lingers on a window with moons, a small plastic bracelet in a shadow box, and a child who no longer apologizes for needing care. The clock on the wall ticks. The sound is steady and small and true. The world is not fixed, but the people in it have learned to stand, to speak, and to keep on doing the work that matters. And sometimes, that is more than enough. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.